Okay, so today we are doing recommendations. I'm taking popular fantasy series that a lot of people know of or have read or something, and I'm pairing them with books from literally any other genre. So if you're looking to read some books outside of the fantasy genre, here are some much loved series, and here are some recommendations outside of that sphere. There are a couple of fantasy books that have kind of slipped their way into the recommendations, but it's rare, it's few and far between. For the most part, I did not touch the fantasy genre, just a couple of times. Also, I'm splitting this video into two parts because I have 4 recommendations per one popular book series, so it's gonna get really long really fast. So I'm splitting this up into 2 videos. So what I did is I got 6 very popular mainstream fantasy series, and I'm giving 4 recommendations per. So in this video, we're doing The Gentleman Bastards, A Song of Ice and Fire series, and the Stormlight Archive. Really, Brandon Sanderson as a whole is gonna be one category. And then for my next video, it's going to be The Kingkiller Chronicles, the 5th season, and One Piece. So check out both the videos, watch all the recommendations, because of these 24 recommendations, I think only 2 books get repeated because they fit in multiple categories. But this is going to be a good wide list of recommendations, so you might find something that you like. But before we get into all the recommendations, a sponsored unboxing. So Book of the Month is a subscription that helps people to discover the best new release, early release, and debut adult fiction books. They offer 5 new release books every month, and members get to pick one to be shipped to their home, or if they want more, in addition to one of their featured boxes, members can add up to 2 featured books, trending books, or previous books as add-ons to their monthly purchase. And members can skip a month anytime they want with no penalty. And first-time members can sign up with any book they like, including these add-ons. So we have Everything We Didn't Say. Pushed out of her hometown after high school, a woman turns to solve the riddle of her family and a horrific crime. The Lincoln Highway. In the 1950s set novel, shenanigans ensue when Emmett Watson hits the open road with 2 friends and a brother in tow. The Ex-Hex. Break out the candy corn. This quirky, steamy rom-com about a major post-breakup hex will put a powerful spell on you. Harlem Shuffle. A riveting and wily historical heist story from a contemporary master that will leave you feeling in on the deal. The Perishing. Set in a hazy 1930s LA, this genre-bending tale of a pioneering journalist explores shifts in time, identity, and love. Apples Never Fall, a novel that looks at marriage, siblings, and how the people we love most can hurt us the deepest. The Book of Magic. The Owens family has been cursed in love for more than 300 years, but all of that is about to change. So head over to bookofthemonth.com to get your first books, and your first month is only $9.99 with the code, which will be linked in the description of this video. First series that I'm recommending books completely outside of the fantasy genre is going to be for The Gentleman Bastards, my favorite series of all time. So the Gentleman Bastards series, a group of orphan boys who have been taken in by a man who teaches them how to swindle, how to thieve, how to be the best con men in the world. And our protagonist is Locke. He has a best friend named Jean, and then a crew of kids around him. We deal with flashbacks, we deal with present time, we see his training and how he grew up, and as well as this big elaborate heist that they're pulling off in present day. He is a really, really smart character that can come up with amazing ways around the system and amazing ways out of problems that he gets himself into. There's high stakes, there's a lot of, the world feels authentic to me in the way he's playing a bad game and he's getting burned a lot of the time and having to work his way out of those compromising situations as well. Amazing friendships, a slow build with a really exciting ride after you get past that slow build. Anyway, some books that I recommend. I feel like my first recommendation should be really obvious just by the way I just described The Gentlemen Bastards. But my first recommendation is going to be The Count of Monte Cristo. The Count of Monte Cristo follows Edmund in the beginning, where he has a really nice life. He has a lady that he loves. He has a best friend that he loves. And then betrayal happens and he gets imprisoned for a crime that he did not commit. So in the beginning of the story, we know more than he does because we see the betrayal, and he's very confused about that. And then while he's in prison, he has a mentor and he incurs a lot of training and kind of flips the switch. The story flips the switch on us, where now he has a plan and a strategy to get back. I'm just gonna say it. He has a plan and a strategy to get back at who have wronged him. It has this big elaborate plan that, much like with the Lies of Locke Lamora, that we are largely in the dark in, and we only have like little ideas, but for the most part we're kind of removed from the plans of the protagonist, and we just have to go along with this twisty, turny, wild, fun ride. It's also really heavy at times. Like, there's some great discussions that are had within the story and within the text that, oh man, I love. I really want to reread this book soon because, oh, it's such a treasure. Speaking of treasure, actually, that was a terrible transition and an unintentional one, but I'm going with it. Treasure Island is my next recommendation. So The Lies of Locke Lamora, like I said, it's a slow start, it's a slow build. It's a really fun slow build in my opinion, but slow. And then once you get to a certain point, it's just a ride. And Treasure Island, to me, is a ride. It's an adventure. I'm sure you know about it because it's one of the most popular pop culture things. Like, even if you haven't read it, you know what the premise is. But to me, this is just such a fun story. You know, The Lies of Locke Lamora has a lot of dark tones to it. And while I don't think Treasure Island does, it was written for, oh, I can't remember the author's name. Robert Louis Stevenson. It was Robert Louis Stevenson. I believe I read, after I read Treasure Island, I read that he and his adopted son made a map, a treasure map. And then he and his son came up with the story together. They came up with a story around the map, and then he read the book and he wrote it, you know, for his son. Oh, isn't that lovely? Anyway, it's such a fun adventure. It's one of those where I really don't want to say much because even just what little I knew going into it kind of took away some of the twists and the turns of it. But it's one of those stories where it really feels like you just never know who's on your side and who you can trust, and you never know what's going to happen around each corner, and it's just fun on every page. Speaking of Treasure Island not being so dark, let's go to The Troop next. So The Troop is a book that I really loved, and that so many people after reading it have come back to me and said, are you okay? Why did you like this? Because it's quite dark. But I feel like if you like The Lies of Locke Lamora, then you're on even playing field with me. You can stomach what I can stomach. So with The Troop, it's a horror novel. It's body horror. So it's this group of Boy Scouts that go off onto this island, but on this island are these worms. And if you get any kind of cut on your body, then the worms can get in that cut. And what they do is they start feasting on you and multiplying and feasting and multiplying and feasting and multiplying until they take you over. And you experience such tremendous hunger that you will do anything to eat, including maybe kill your friends. So we have this group of Boy Scouts, and we're in this like truly terrifying, disturbing, disgusting situation, but then also the situation of, okay, what happens if one of us is infected? What do we do with like one of our own? Or what happens if someone has an injury and we know that they could potentially get infected? Do we risk leaving them here, or do we just throw them out to die? Certainly. And you know, there's a lot of grossness and a lot of suspense to it, but then there's also a lot of internal. I think my favorite part of the story was just watching these boys try to figure out what they're supposed to do here. Like, how are they supposed to get out of this, and what are they supposed to do with the inner conflicts that comes with what this parasite, this worm, is doing to them. I also just really liked the ending. I thought that it had a really, really satisfying ending for the story. A trigger warning for animal brutality. if that's something that bothers you, there are 3 scenes of that. I skimmed over all of them, so I personally recommend physically reading it because with audio, it's hard to skim things. But the rest of the story is just, oh, it's so good. And then the last book on this list is Tess of, hold on, one second. I looked it up and then I forgot it. D'Urberville. Tess of D'Urberville. So this is kind of an odd recommendation for The Lies of Locke Lamora, but I think it fits just because it's a story that's really focused on the struggles that the individuals are facing and their personal lives and what is happening to them, if that makes sense, which I feel like the Gentleman Bastard series does really well, where it just hyper focuses on our main characters and on what the world is doing against them and how they're responding. And I think that Tess of D'Urberville's is really good, is really good at kind of catching that same vibe, or at least that's how I felt while reading it. I also think that just one of my favorite things about The Lies of Locke Lamora is the honesty of the story. One of my favorite things about the series is how it just genuinely feels like I'm with real people who are making real decisions and the world is reacting honestly to those decisions. And everything just feels like, it doesn't feel like fiction to me. It feels like I'm reading something, you know, that isn't tightly paced or well plotted or well structured, or the plot is you know, like all these writerly or readerly things that we praise books by. Even though I think that The Gentleman Bastards is extraordinarily written, I don't think of it in that way. I think of it as, this feels like I'm going through life with people and it feels like a real life, you know what I mean? And I really got that vibe off of Tess of the D'Urbervilles. The characters felt real to me, their struggles that they were going through felt real to me, and the way that people were responding to them and to Tess specifically just felt really honest. And I feel like even though this is kind of a very, very different kind of story, I don't know, this one fits to me as well for some reason. Okay, next series we're going to do is A Song of Ice and Fire. So full transparency, I read the first 2 books in A Song of Ice and Fire, and I didn't continue with the series, and I don't know that I will. It's not really the series for me. That said, I have a couple of books outside of the genre that I think fans of the series could potentially really enjoy. The first one on my list is the Red Rising saga, which I didn't like Red Rising. I did like books 2 and 3 a lot more, but I do think that it's kind of a good fit between the 2 series. Obviously, I didn't say this at the beginning of the video, obviously none of these recommendations are gonna be just like or even all that similar to the main book that I'm recommending. It's just something that I feel like somebody who enjoys one thing could potentially like this from another genre. Red Rising has this setup where there's this class system, which I think is really interesting, that's based off of colors. And Darrow, our main character, is a red, which is one of the lower classes. And there's this battle royale type thing that happens, and Darrow ends up, due to a number of circumstances, ends up in it. So there's a lot of action, there's a lot of really intense, really dark things that they have to go through. And I think that there's one thing that A Song of Ice and Fire does well, I think, is using the violence and the brutality to point to other things, to have discussions or to really break down certain stuff. And while I don't necessarily think Red Rising did that well, I think that the following books did it very well. It's a really high action story, and it's one with a lot of twists and turns, and that I think is incredibly unpredictable, again, more so in books 2 and 3. But book 1 is really well loved too. I just didn't like it, but you know, who am I? But another great thing about A Song of Ice and Fire is that you really genuinely never know what's around the corner. You think it's going in one direction, and then something really, I guess similar to The Lies of Locke Lamora, where it just feels like a very honest, brutal world, and something happens that isn't convenient to the characters, that doesn't suit the plot necessarily, but that just feels honest, happens, and then the characters have to adapt and have to change, and you're constantly kept on your toes, and you're constantly unsure of what's to come of it. And I think that the Red Rising saga captures that feeling very well as well. Next recommendation for a Song of Ice and Fire series is going to be Death Note. So Death Note is a manga series, and the premise of this is that this god is bored one day, and so he drops his Death Note just to see what would happen if it were in a human's hands. And our protagonist, Light, ends up picking it up. So what a Death Note is you can put a person's name and their cause of death in the notebook. I'm pretty sure that's all that's needed. It's been a bit since I've read this one. And their time of death. So name, cause of death, time of death in the notebook, and then it will be so. So Light ends up picking up the Death Note, and at first he's thinking, cool, I'm gonna make the world a better place. I'm gonna pick off the bad guys, the real bad guys. But in the hands of anyone, this kind of power, absolute power corrupts absolutely. In the hands of a mortal, this kind of power may change a person. And not only is the god that we follow just a delightful character to follow, but also the twists and the turns of this series, along with the themes. I think while it being a much lighter story than A Song of Ice and Fire is, I think that it has something that I think would grasp a lot of people, grip a lot of people, that may enjoy A Song of Ice and Fire as well. I sure loved it. I thought it was wonderful. Next, I'm going to recommend Lovecraft. So obviously this is really different, but Lovecraft has a lot of short stories that really have quite a lot of suspense to them, a lot of uncomfortability. And I think that Lovecraft does a really good job of kind of shifting the main ideas of storytelling and the main structures and rules of storytelling to create something very, very unique. Obviously, this is very, very different from A Song of Ice and Fire, but I feel like the way Lovecraft writes his very intentional prose and his very intentional storytelling would grip the reader in a similar way. And finally, I'm choosing Jurassic Park, which is probably the most strange recommendation for this particular category, but it works to me. So Martin is a slow storyteller, and he's an environmental storyteller. He loves to build his world, and he loves to have small details that pay off in big ways later. And I think that Creighton does that as well. He's so good at starting a story by laying a firm foundation and then springboarding from there, which I think is what Martin does. So Jurassic Park is a sci-fi, and it's obviously, again, super different, but the beginning of the story is very environmental, and it's very, it's an establishing beginning, showing us what's happening in the lab, what's happening on the island, introducing us to the characters, which I really, really enjoyed because I felt like I was completely there in the story, which I think Martin does too. The 2 books of his that I've read, I feel like I'm there, like I'm experiencing it with them, which is partially why I didn't continue because, man, it's hard to experience things with these characters and in this world. But anyway, I think that Creighton does a similar job of the ground laying, the establishing, and the little things that end up being significant later on. And much like Martin, once you get that ground laying and once you get that establishing, he really springboards and you're just in for a ride. Obviously, again, Jurassic Park is one that a lot of people already know about, but I personally like the book better than the movie. I think that much like Martin, Creighton is a smart writer, and he writes his characters smart. And finally, the last book that I'm going to be doing on this, the Stormlight Archive, is actually an author, and it's Brandon Sanderson. So for Brandon Sanderson, I feel like there's a lot of different things that people like about him, but for me, I think the main things that I see people talking about and that I love about him are his character work, his world building, and his magic system. As I've said many, many times, Sanderson loves his world building a little bit more than I do, but a lot of people love of the intricacies of his world building. I personally love the way he writes his characters, how deep he goes, how intense he goes, and how honest and real it feels a lot of the time. And he has really cool magic systems, but I can't really give you magic systems when we're going outside of fantasy. The first thing I'm going to give you, and this is the only time I'm giving you a fantasy recommendation in this video, I think there's one more in the next video. But the first one I'm going to give you is Discworld, and that's for the world building. Now, again, full transparency, I have only read 2 Discworld books. I'm not very far into the series, but this series is vast and it's intricate and it's detailed. And if you're someone who really loves the intentionality of the way Sanderson creates his worlds and the intentionality of the tiny little details, and again, like I said, with the last category, how it comes back around. That's one of my favorite things about Sanderson, is that his plotting is so intentional. If you love those things about Sanderson, I really think Terry Pratchett is another storyteller that you will love. Next, I'm going to recommend you The Outsiders. So this is more on the way Sanderson tells his, or writes his characters. The Outsiders is a story that is so character focused that it's kind of difficult to even give you a synopsis or description of it. But it's these 3 brothers who have grown up together, who are really, really tight. And you have the, oh man, it's been a while. You have the Greasers and the Preps, is that right? Socias. The Greasers and the Socias. I can't find it on the description, but that just popped into my head, so I like to think that that's probably true. Anyway, this has these 2 groups of people that are of very different social standing and expectations. And our main character, Ponyboy, and his 2 brothers are Greasers. And the plot kind of kicks off when these Greaser boys are hanging out with a couple Soch girls. And that escalates when some Soch boys don't appreciate the dynamic. It really this is, maybe it's a little bit of a stretch, but I feel like if you like the dynamic of Stormlight, of Kaladin's struggles, and his, I think you'll appreciate what's happening here in The Outsiders as well. It's obviously very different. Don't come back and be mad at me that this isn't Kaladin. But I feel like the way Sanderson writes this sort of thing, you'll appreciate what's happening in The Outsiders. But anyway, it kind of, the story goes from there, and it's such a character-focused story that it's kind of hard for me to give you any more plot than that. But the amount that we get attached to Ponyboy and to his brothers and to his friends, I think is really amazing. We go through a lot of emotions in the story, and the way S.E. Hinton writes these characters, writes this story, writes the emotional climax of the story, I think is something that fans of what Sanderson does and what Sanderson brings to the table with how honestly he writes a character's struggles, I think that you'll appreciate The Outsiders too. Next, I have Anything Bachman. So Frederick Bachman is my favorite author. I have a lot of favorites in these videos. And I kind of struggled to decide which Bachman book to recommend you. I kind of lean towards Anxious People or maybe Beartown. Really, I would recommend absolutely any Bachman book at all. Beartown has a huge cast of characters and it's a slow build which turns a lot of people off, but if you're a Sanderson fan, you'll be fine. But I think that Bachman would work really well because, again, his very, very honest and real and authentic feeling character work, the way he dives really deep into what's going on in the head of a person, which is why I lean towards Anxious People, the way Sanderson dives so deep into the head of a person and the mentality of a person and understanding people and their internal struggles. Bachman, I think, is so good at. As well as Bachman has a wonderful sense of humor, in my opinion, which I think that Sanderson does too. Sanderson makes me laugh out loud a lot, and Bachman makes me laugh out loud constantly. And finally, the last book recommendation for Sanderson, and for this video, see why I split it up into 2? It's already been so long. The final recommendation I have for you is Dark Matter. So this is a sci-fi slash thriller. This follows a protagonist whose name I've forgotten. Jason. This follows Jason, who wakes up one morning and he is beat up And everything in his life looks different. His home looks different. His answering machine message has changed. A lot of things are different, yet everything's also kind of the same. And I think it's fine to say what the thing we're doing in this story is. It's alternate dimensions. So Jason, I won't tell you why he's here or how he ended up somewhere else, but his goal is to get back to his own self, because this is the wrong Jason's area. The reason I recommend this one is not because of character stuff, it's not because of world stuff, it's because when I think Sanderson is writing a really tightly paced, like, okay, Sanderson can either write something like Gentlemen Bastards, where you're just in a world with people. Stormlight Archive is what I think of. There's so much intentionality there and there's so much happening there, but he also really doesn't try to be tightly paced in the Stormlight Archive, right? But then there are other stories where he pulls off tight pacing amazingly. He just does different things in different series. I think that the second Mistborn series, some of those books are really, really tightly paced. I think that the Skyward series is also very tightly paced. But when he's doing that, when he's doing a really tight pacing and a really action-heavy story, I think it feels so much like Dark Matter. Very different, but I do think that I feel like if you like books like Shadow of Self and Alloy of Law and Skyward, if you like that section of what Sanderson writes, then Dark Matter is like the sci-fi thriller that could potentially be a lot of fun for you to read. Okay, that is the first video where I recommend those ones. In the next video, we're doing Kingkiller Chronicles 5th season and One Piece. I could do more. I mean, obviously, like Lord of the Rings, Joe Abercrombie, Evan Winters. There's so many of these videos that I could do, but I'm cutting it at 2 unless y'all really want more. But next time we're doing Kingkiller 5th season and One Piece, so hang out with me again tomorrow with even more recommendations. Be sure to chat with me more in the comments. Are there any of these books that you are now going to pick up or any that you would recommend in these categories? I post videos every Tuesday through Friday. I'll see you again soon. Bye.